Hi and welcome back. I'm Dennis Frechette, and today I'm going to be working on another pair of tongs. I've been doing a lot of cleaning up lately, and I've come across a lot of tong blanks that never got made, or just pairs of tongs that aren't really that useful, so I'd like to convert them into something else, and that's what I'm going to be working on today. I'm going to take a pair of flat bit tongs, and I'm going to convert them into a pair of box tongs. So I'm going to take just a piece of flat bar, and I'm going to forge weld it to one of the jaws and turn a relatively useless pair of tongs into something that I can use. Hope you enjoy it. Here I'm setting up the weld on the jaws by heating it up to a dull red heat and scraping away as much of the scale as I can with a wire brush. The dull red heat is hot enough to allow you to get rid of the scale, but not so hot that it's going to start reintroducing scale as soon as you stop brushing it. And then of course you apply flux on it to prevent it from reoxidizing. And of course you do the same thing with the piece of flat bar that you're working with. Now that the pieces are ready to be forge welded, I need to have a fire that can do the forge weld, and a good forge welding fire has a lot of clean coke in the center of the fire and a lot of raw coal around the outside of the fire. And the coal actually insulates the fire, creates an oven, and provides the fuel for the next round of coke that you're going to need in the center of the fire. This clip is actually an afterthought, by the way. You'll notice that I'm actually heating up the finished pair of tongs, and I was doing that to clean the scale away, but I decided to expand the clip and bring it to a forge welding heat so I could explain that process. One of the reasons forge welding is so difficult to learn is because when you get advice from different people, it's always different advice, and it works for each one of them, so you can't really argue with the advice, but you really don't know what to do. So what I'm doing here is just basically adding to the confusion because this is how I do it, and I'm pretty sure it's not the way anybody else does it. Once I'm satisfied with how the fire is going, I'll go ahead and put the steel in the fire, and I'll keep cranking on the blower for a little while until I see that the steel is starting to heat up, and then I'm going to ease up quite a bit and just give it enough air to keep going. Here you see me using the poker to make sure that I still have a good solid fire. I'll reach into the fire and I'll move the edges towards the center to make sure that I don't have any air pockets or any kind of chimneys that could send a direct blast of air to the steel, because that'll cause it to burn very quickly. So the reason you're using coke in the center of the fire is because it burns super hot, and once it gets a good head of steam going, you can keep it going with very little air. And that's important when you're forge welding. So the fire's right where I want it to be. The metal is heating up. Now it's time to just walk away from the fire for a few minutes. I know this is counterintuitive and it's really hard to do, but it's really important because what you're doing now is allowing the heat from the fire to soak into the steel. There's no chance of burning the steel because, there's no air being introduced into the fire, but all of that heat that you've built up is being transferred to the steel, and it's going right to the core. And that is the real secret, I believe, to a good forge weld, making sure that the metal is hot all the way through. Now, I'm not standing there looking at the fire. I'm, walking around. You'll hear me in the background setting up different things or cleaning up. But it's really important to take the time to let the heat from the fire soak into the metal slowly. Here I'm having a look at the piece of steel. I know you're not supposed to do that, but I do it all the time, and it's really important to make sure that it's heating up evenly, and you'll notice that it's heating up more on one side, so I'm going to shove it over a little bit in the fire so it's sitting right over top of the hot spot. And then when I put it back in the fire, I just repeat the process. I'll get the fire going. Once I see that the steel is starting to respond to the fire, I'll ease up and just keep repeating that process until I feel that I have a good heat. I'm using a hand crank blower, so the rattling that you're hearing in the background is the backlash from the gear. So it's pretty easy to tell when I'm using the blower and when I'm letting the fire sit, as well as the flame, obviously lets you know when there's air being introduced. Here I'm having one last look at the piece of steel. Depending on what I see, I might change the position in the fire a little bit, work with the fire to, pick up any loose areas or whatever. But at this point, it's basically heating up okay. It's just a little bit of fine tuning. So back in the fire it goes. I'm going to bury it, give it a little air to get it going, ease up so it can even out and soak into the steel, and then basically just wait for the right temperature to pull it out. The one thing that I definitely don't want to see right now is a thick, lumpy, crusty layer of who knows what that looks like the outside edge of a deep dish pizza. When you have that, you know that you've been giving it way too much air. The flux layer is totally gone. It's not working anymore, and you're just building scale onto the outside of the piece. And there is no way that you can weld through that. The only thing you can do at this point is to clean all of that scale off, get right back down to bare metal, reapply the flux, and really pay attention to your fire and the amount of air that you're putting into the fire to get to your welding heat. At this point, the piece is almost ready to be welded, so I'm just going to keep an eye on it, just keep pushing it as far as I can. I try to get as much heat into the metal as possible. This whole sequence was real time, by the way. I've edited nothing out, so this is roughly 8 minutes, and that's what it took me to go from cold steel to a welding heat. And you'll see in a second when I pull this out, it's a nice bright color, and it's just covered in that melted butter that everyone's looking for. Of course, I'm working with really small pieces here, so if you're working with something that's a lot larger, then you have to expand the timeline to fit the piece that you're working with. And here's where all that preparation pays off. I have a really good solid heat. I don't have to rush through the process. As soon as I touch these two pieces together, they want to stick together. I'm making the initial tack weld just by putting pressure on the two pieces and forcing them together. And then later on I'll use a hammer just to thin out the front edge to start creating a scarf to make sure that I have contact right around the outside surface. I get asked a lot about flux, and this is just 20 mule team borax right out of the box. I haven't done anything to it, and it may seem like I'm putting a lot on here, but I'm really not. You have to realize that in this condition, it's 90% water, so you have to boil all of that water away to get to the boric oxide, that liquidy film that's going to be left, and that's what's going to protect you from the metal reoxidizing. So don't worry about all the bubbling and all that activity. It's just, you know, part of the process. Now I'm going to repeat this process again and take the bar through a couple more welding heats just to make sure that I have a good solid weld. This is a working pair of tongs, so they just need to be functional. So I am going to take the approach that was usually taken in most country blacksmith shops. They took all the time they needed to make sure that they were making a strong weld that was reliable, but they rarely took the time to make the weld pretty and make sure that it was totally hidden. You know, that was considered a waste of time. You'll notice in this shot I have another pair of tongs that I've repurposed to hold the set hammers that I have. So I have a couple of different sizes, so I've made a few of these to accommodate all the different set hammers that I have. So far I'm liking this system. I don't use a lot of set hammers, so it's a lot easier for me to have all the set hammers sitting in a tray or something, and then just a couple of pair of tongs that I need to handle the different sizes. And of course, these tongs can also be used to hold punches or drifts, so that's another added advantage. I'm using the set hammer to push the back side of the jaw up against the anvil, and that gives me a flat surface to work with when I have a piece of steel inside of these tongs. I don't know if it's really necessary, but it just makes a lot more sense to have more surface area than less. This is the swage block that I'm going to be using to forge the ends of the box. I've used a lot of different systems over the years, and some of them were really overcomplicated for nothing, but I've settled on this. I really like it. It's nice and simple. It sits on the anvil very well, and it hangs up on a peg, so you can't ask for anything better. And of course, I don't go anywhere without my dividers. And for those of you who've been asking, this is why I added this little tiny horn on the side of my anvil. When I was making a lot of tongs, it was just so much easier to have something built right in than having to switch out hardy tools or whatever all the time. And of course, the last step of the process is always to size the tongs to fit whatever it is you're trying to hold. I'm using this punch to separate the brains, and that's going to allow me to hammer the front of the jaws and tighten them up a little bit so it grabs this bar stock the way I want it. One nice thing about recycling tongs is you have very little adjusting to do at the end because you're already starting out with a good working pair of tongs. You're just changing its purpose. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.